Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Downright Upright Show, the place to go to hear out loud and proud what Minnesotans are thinking. And I am your host, Philip Anthony. I'm so glad you can join us today, and I hope you're all doing fantabulous. Fantabulous is my little word. Fantastic and fabulous put together twice as nice, right? My special guest today, I'm so excited about having him on the show today, is LGBTQ plus advocate, the founder and curator of the Queer Armenian Library, and the host of the podcast This Queer Book Saved My Life, which I love, J.P. Der Boghossian. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Close.
Okay.
So it's Bogo, like buy one, get one. C, as in I see you, and then Jan, like Jan from Sweden.
Okay, Boghossian.
Perfect.
Boghossian.
Yeah.
Der Boghossian. Oh my God, that's easy.
Yeah.
See, when you learn your phonics in kindergarten, it helped.
And now that's your first word that you've spoken in Western Armenian.
Oh, thanks. Great. By the way, I identify as gay, and my pronouns are he and him. And how would you like me to identify you, and what are you on the LGBTQ spectrum, so the listeners would know about it?
Yeah, so I identify as queer, and I use he, they pronouns.
All righty. Thank you for that. Before we talk about your advocacy for the LGBTQ community and your amazing library and podcast, I always like to start by asking about your beginnings. So where were you born and raised, went to school, and all that fun stuff?
So I am Armenian American, and my Armenian family ended up in France after the genocide. They were on work visa, refugee visas. My dad's family is from Northwest Lower Michigan. So if you look at the palm of your right hand and you tap the top of your pinky, that's where I was born. But my mom's family, the Armenian side, is still in France. So by the time I was like 9 months old, I was already on a plane over to visit the family. And I bounced back and forth. Going back between both continents, if you will, or family from over there was coming over here. So it was a very multilingual, intercultural, travel all the time household that I grew up in.
And is Armenia independent now? I'm ignorant on my world history because I haven't been to school
absolutely.
since I was. I'm only 15. No, just kidding. When did you tell us a little bit about that, about Armenia and when it became independent and all that stuff?
Yeah, Armenia is a very ancient country. It's one of the oldest in the world. Goes all the way back to like classical history. And I'm not going to take you all the way through that, but it was part of the Russian and Ottoman empires, and then it was independent after World War I, and then the Soviets invaded and took over, and it was one of the socialist republics of the USSR, and then it gained its independence in the early, I believe it was 1991, as did Artsakh, which was an autonomous region within the Soviet Union as well, and that was also populated by Armenians and has been Armenian for thousands of years as well. So they gained Armenia gained its independence, and Artsakh gained its independence through a war after the Soviet Union collapsed, and that status is still not resolved. There's a current war in between Azerbaijan and Artsakh. So that's difficult to be navigating right now. It's very stressful.
Yeah.
There's a blockade of the only road between Armenia and Artsakh right now by Azerbaijani army and eco-terrorists, frankly. And so we're doing what we can to reestablish humanitarian aid to the country and to stop Azerbaijan as it's winter and they're cutting off gas supplies, and there are people who are diabetic and they need insulin, and people need food, and so it's a really tough time.
Sounds familiar because I have a friend who has family. She flew with me a few times, and she has family in Ukraine. She can't even speak to them. There's no communication, and all she does is cry. And it's just. I mean, when you think about it, this is humanity, and we're all human beings. How we could treat each other in such a horrible way it's crazy. Anyway, let's veer away from that a little bit and try to get a little happier times here. So getting back to your LGBTQ roots, when did you realize you were different from other kids growing up? Because I could tell you my story, but mine's a really long one. But in school or in the neighborhood where you grew up, and can you talk a bit about your coming out journey?
Ooh, okay. I'll try to keep this brief. So I understood myself as not straight when I hit puberty. So this would have been about 6th grade. And
oh, really? 6th grade? So
yeah,
that's like,
it was early.
Like 12-ish, 13?
Yeah, 11, 12 in there, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so I grew up in a very Christian faith tradition on both sides of the family, right? So Wesleyan on my dad's side and the Armenian Protestant church on my mom's side. And this was right when HIV and AIDS the pandemic was really exploding. And so I was just surrounded by hate towards queer people. And there was also an additional layer to that of, being Armenian and being the grandson and great-grandson of genocide survivors. And in the Christian faith tradition, right, queerness is a choice. And so there was this, message of how dare you be queer because, we need to repopulate. You need to marry a Armenian wife and you need to have Armenian children. Like that's what you owe your family members and ancestors who didn't survive, right, the genocide, and those who did survive the genocide to make sure that I had a life, right, today. And that's a really heavy thing to put on queer kids, queer Armenian kids, whether they're, Armenian American, Franco, Armenian, Russian Armenian. It's really difficult, right, to navigate that. And I, through that, was trying to develop my own. I was very connected to my Wesleyan church and the youth pastor there, and was like trying to, on my own, create a conversion therapy protocol. Which now, when I became like in my early 20s, and I found the the manuals from other like conversion therapy protocols, I was like, oh, I invented that when I was 11.
So you actually, I hate to interrupt you, but you actually went through conversion therapy?
No, I didn't go through it. I kind of was like
okay.
cobbling together my own version of that because I wasn't telling anybody. And this was something I was doing like in secret on my own. And it was, you can imagine, that's very isolating. So I was hoping that it would work. And then when it didn't happen, about 17 years old is when I left the church and went on my own journey. And it was long and it was arduous. And I had ultimately, there was some highlights, but also some tragic moments in there. And finally started coming out in my mid-20s after a suicide attempt and then some suicide ideation like a year later. And then I was finally able to begin to process through therapy. And I had a really amazing therapist who was able to help me begin to integrate, right, and address the grief that I had of not being straight and what that was doing in my life, and also how to be a queer person and navigate that and being in the world and having, resources within myself and tools of how I could do that, and come out on my own terms. And I ultimately, started with my, friends and family, and I was working in Michigan, and that was also arduous because you could be fired. Sure. In, a private job for being queer, and you have no legal recourse. And so I was always kind of making that dance when I was, working. And then I finally came out to my parents in my early, I think it was 31, right, when I did that. So. Oh,
wow. Okay. That's late, 31. But you came out before me, but to yourself, but you came out to everybody else later, right? Is that right?
It was over my 20s, and
wow.
Early
So you had
30s.
A long journey there. Yeah. Mine was, I knew I was different from as far back as I can remember. I remember playing with dolls as a kid.
Right.
And, I had female cousins who would come over. I'd be so much more excited to see them than my male cousins. And, they wanted to go out and do boy things, and I didn't. And so I knew there was something, but I couldn't articulate what it was. I couldn't put my finger on it. I knew there was something, I would call it odd about me. I didn't say gay. God forbid. I was Catholic. I couldn't say that.
Right. No.
Right. You would never admit that. So I was lying to myself pretty much my whole childhood, my whole teenage years, up until my early 20s when I went to college and realized that there's nothing wrong with me, that there were so many other people like me. And luckily I went to school in New York, so that helped.
So the first college that I went to was actually an Actors Academy. And that was, you would think that would have been an opportune place to come out, right? You're surrounded by theater majors, and there's that whole stereotype, right, of the theater community. But I actually, and this is why I get so upset now about the whole conversation about, should gay actors play gay roles? And I'm like, I had to stay in the closet while I was there because it was so important to me to not be perceived as queer because I would have lost out on roles. And so I was doing the whole thing with like my vocal training to make sure I didn't have any sibilant S's and like all the physical training so that my body wasn't read as queer. And now when I hear people like saying like, yeah, straight people are entitled to queer roles, and I'm like, no. Like what I went through and what so many queer actors go through, like we should be able to see a queer body performing a queer role, whether it's on stage or television or film, is so revolutionary and so powerful. And actors are artists. And I get really emotional about this subject because, I studied in LA and I studied with a British, drama academy in Oxford, England. And so I spent a lot of time on the, learning about acting, and it was you would think that would have been an opportune place to come out, and it really wasn't.
But we have a history of that, though. I mean, I can remember many movies where there were Native American characters or black characters or Asian characters, and they had white people, they'd paint their face and make them look whatever race they were supposed to be. And even now when I look at it, it's so I bring up my lunch. I mean, it's just so gross. Why can't you find – I'm sure there's somebody that could do that role and that's of that persuasion. But I can't imagine being a gay person back in those days because I was never interested in acting. I was kind of shy back. I was a very not well-liked kid because I was different. Kids pushed my books on the floor, beat me up, stole my lunch money. My mom would give me money to buy candy or buy lunch or whatever every day, and she goes, "Philip, how come you don't, you didn't eat your lunch today? No, where's your money? Oh, I spent it on what?" But I would never tell her that the kids stole it. So it was really bad. I hate to even think about those times but I share in your walk through life because we went, being gay in those days. Today. The kids have it a lot better. I wish I had a safe space to go and be like in a gay club in a school or –
I know, right?
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like I can't even imagine that. I mean, that would have been so cool to just, meet people just like me and, validate myself because I had no self-worth really. But anyway, but thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. That's great. So what let's move on to what your voice in the LGBTQ community. What prompted you to become involved in being a voice for the LGBTQ plus community? Was there a particular person or an event or something that guided you to that advocacy?
There wasn't a single incident. I think it was a evolving sense of myself. The more I was comfortable and able to understand myself as a queer person, then I found myself gravitating towards advocacy roles. And that started within just my own work within higher education. And then, constantly taking on, I wouldn't say the cause, but trying to create spaces for either, queer students or for queer colleagues so that they could feel a sense of belonging, right, within, and pride in the institution as well. There was a college that I worked for, St. Paul College, and my students, we carried the pride flag, the rainbow flag in Pride, in Twin Cities Pride. And we did that for like 2 years in a row, right? And that was really important not only for the students, for the larger community, right, but also for the college to see, themselves represented in such a high-profile way. Then I was really lucky. I got a job with an organization that was an LGBTQ health equity organization. They were called Rainbow Health Initiative, and I was really privileged as an educator to take all of their community health data that nobody else had, nobody else was collecting in the state of Minnesota, and I was able to take that data from our research manager and then craft that into educational programming. And so I was all over the state of Minnesota. I was working with medical academic programs, I was working with small clinics, I was working with major clinics like Health Partners, Fairview. I helped organize an entire trans health conference, right, for them. And then I also was working with insurance companies, like Blue Cross and whatnot. And we organized the first LGBTQ health conference for the state of Minnesota. So that was really important to me as well, to begin to see how stress from being queer was impacting our health of our bodies and our emotional health, even our spiritual health, and to find out, that about 3% of queer people are turned away from healthcare providers in the state of Minnesota for being queer. Like, they find out, and the provider's like, nope, I'm not going to provide healthcare to you, which is insane. It's absolutely how is this happening? How are people getting away with this? But the queer people are like, I don't want to get dragged into a battle with the care provider, and so they move on and find another care provider, and so this system, perpetuates itself. But that work with Rainbow Health Initiative then led to the work that I wouldn't say it led to, but the more I do work within the community, the more confident I feel within myself, and the more well-resourced I feel within myself, which then allows me to do more work. And so
you're a beautiful soul. I just have to tell you that.
No.
No. See, it took I have to tell you this, and I'll tell you why. Because what brought me into advocacy was it took AIDS. Because I was coming of age during AIDS. AIDS is I get very emotional during the AIDS because I lost my best friend. I lost a lot of people that I really loved. And nobody cared. It was awful. It was like these were not human beings. It was anyway. But I'm going off.
I'm sorry.
But
about that.
no, yes. So it took me that to drag me into it. You just did it because you love your community, and it didn't take this big earthquake to move you. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say? Yeah. So I think that I just want to thank you for that. That's amazing. And as far as AIDS is concerned, there's so many people, even to this day, who are still living with the pain, whether it's they still have AIDS or they lost family members, and it never goes away. It really doesn't. When you think about them, it's unbelievable. And then you had the president of the United States. It took him way into his second term to even mention the word. And it took Rock Hudson passing away for him to finally wake up and say, yes, AIDS is, we have to worry, do something about it. So, yeah. But and I'd like to thank you personally for your advocacy for the LGBT plus community, and especially the trans community, because they are now getting the brunt of what we went through as gay people. See, we went through that whole thing, gays this and gays that. Now it's the trans people, they're, like in DeSantis is doing in Florida, and other states are doing, demonizing them and treating them, horribly. And so we all have to stick together as a community. Every letter of the LGBTQ plus,
right.
Whatever letter you are. So, again, thank you for that. So I'm going to veer off to another, I wish the show was 3 hours.
Right.
You're so interesting. Thank you. Would you like to explain to the listeners what the Queer Armenian Library is and what some of the topics are that they would find if they were to visit your website?
The Queer Armenian Library is the world's first library of books and literature and TV series and film and artwork that is made by and or for and or about queer Armenian people. And it was a 4-year project that started as a personal project because those two identities I had kept so separate throughout my life. And then finally in my mid-30s, I said, I need to start to put these two things together. I need to, see how I can live in the world as both queer and as Armenian and not have those things constantly be in conflict with each other.
What a dichotomy that must have been for you.
It was tough.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. It was really tough.
Yes, it must have been, yes.
I am a book person, and my joke is that I came out of the womb with a book, and books have always been my solace, and I've always, turned to them to help me understand the world. And so I said, okay, there's got to be something. There's got to be an op-ed, a poem. Maybe there's a nonfiction book out there that somebody wrote, maybe some news articles that are actually positive or at least neutral, about the queer Armenian experience. And so I was at a conference in Washington, D.C., and I put the words gay Armenian into Google, and that's when it began. And, I began doing all of these searches, not just through Google, but, looking through Barnes & Noble and Amazon and Thrift Books, which is an amazing site where you can literally Google, or not Google, but you can search all the thrift stores and their books that they have, right? And I was finding Armenian bookstores and looking at their online catalogs, trying to find, and I was looking through like LGBT Armenian, gay Armenian, bisexual Armenian, trans Armenian, like all of these different search terms. And it was wild because, I would go to a site and I'd search something, in January, and I'd come back again in June and find something new, right? And so it was this constant ongoing process, and I'd buy the books and watch the films or the TV series, and I eventually, about 4 years in, realized I might have the most comprehensive collection, and I can't just keep that to myself. Like, nobody else should have to go through this. And so I said, well, I'll create a website, and then me being me, I didn't it could have been really simple, just put a list of titles, right, on a website and just publish it. And I was like, no, I want to have a page devoted to each book. And I want there to be like a bio of the author and like pull quotes. And if I can find like a video or a radio interview or podcast interview they did, then I want to embed that right in the page. And then I want to help people like find how to buy the book, so they can just click the link and go. They don't have to like then search, okay, well, here's this book, how do I find it? And because that was also a chore, right? Because these books are, throughout the world. And I think I did like 3 versions of the website. It took about a year to create the website, and then I finally published it in November of 2020.
It's beautiful, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
For the listeners, go there, and I'll give you all the information at the end of the show so people can go on to your website. And, I mean, there's so many different categories. I mean, it's amazing what you've accumulated over the years. It's fabulous. It's just great. And
what we discovered in the process, and this is what I was not expecting, is that we literally, I found a subgenre of queer literature that was Armenian focused, and we found a subgenre of Armenian literature which is queer focused, and nobody knew that existed. And the quantity and the quality of it and the breadth of it, not just in the United States but also within Armenia. And so it was really illuminating, right, for folks. And I just got an invitation like last week for a virtual conference that's happening in Eastern Europe to present on it. And, so that's like the word is out there, and I know it's a very niche topic, but for me, I was like, I know I'm never going to get like thousands of hits on this website. For me, what I look at is in WordPress, where I created the site, there is a map. It's kind of like a heat map that shows you all of the different countries where people are going coming from, right, to access the website. And I love this. They use pink as the as the color to shade the different countries. Yeah. And after I published it, it was just so gratifying to see the entire world turn pink.
Really?
Yeah, of all these people from across the world that were coming to the site and accessing it. And that just, made me really proud of that. And now we've actually grown to the point where we've brought in a managing editor, Natalie Cruz. And so we volunteer. This is a labor of love. Like, there's not actually money that comes out of this. But Natalie Cruz, she's just started working. She's actually an art historian, and she is finding all of these amazing Armenian artists, like visual art. And so we're literally building out now the art wing, if you will, of the library. Right. And so stay tuned for that. There's going to be a whole bunch of new updates coming to the library starting this spring. And we were just meeting on Friday.
Not worthy. You are amazing. And the funny thing is, I did my little clicks throughout the, and it talks about Armenian famous people that are Armenian and are in the LGBTQ plus community, such as Chaz Bono. I didn't even know that. I mean, till I read.
Sure, yeah.
Well, yes. Yeah. But I didn't put you got to put 2 and 2 together and get 4. Yeah. I didn't do that. And there were other people at which I off the top of my head I can't remember. But yeah, and you're giving these people, a platform. I mean, Chaz Bono wrote a book, I think, as well, right?
It's a memoir,
about what his journey was going through being Armenian as well, and coming out as trans, and wow. Well, again, at the end of the show, I will give the listeners the information. So I'd like to preface my question by emphasizing that your library is not only for LGBTQ plus Armenians, but for everyone in our community. Can you tell our listeners a bit about the Armenian culture and the struggle of Armenian people in particular, and the struggle of LGBTQ plus Armenians. So no, let's make this short. How can we?
I was going to say that's a 3-hour answer.
Yeah,
right
no, I was going to say that. So I'm going to try to help you out here if I can. So for the people that are an Armenian and they're LGBTQ, how would it help? How could it enhance their view of your culture and about LGBTQ plus issues?
I think that queer Armenians have a shared experience with queer people across the globe, but we also have insights that may be useful. I'm at a point in my career where I'm done kind of like justifying the validity and like my humanity. And part of me is like, I want to say that there's obviously this value in these books and in these stories, but at the same time, I'm like, there is inherent value and we don't need to be constantly, proving it right to straight people and to cisgender people. But I think that there is a perspective on queerness and how we inhabit our bodies, particularly within a diaspora. All queer people are in a diaspora, right? We understand ourselves as queer. We're most likely in a family where we're the only ones. And we may be growing up in communities where there's maybe like 5 of us. And we always have to go out into the world and find ourselves and find our families of choice and find our friends and find our community. So we're in this diaspora, and I think Armenians very much understand diaspora, right? We are displaced people. We are indigenous to Southwest Asia, but because of the genocide and lots of other like horrendous like pogroms and wars and whatnot, we are spread throughout the globe. And I think that we're able to give that idea of how do you create a home? How do you create a home in your body? How do you create a home within a community? And there's lots of other cultures, right, that can do that. But there's something I think that is unique and interesting to folks about how do you go about doing that, right? How do you go about putting your life back together after a traumatic experience, whether that's to you or to your community, right? Like a genocide or a war. And how do you navigate Christianity, right? There's a really different dynamic of how, Armenia was the first country to adopt Christianity as a state religion. And it was very violent how that happened, right? It wasn't like everybody voted like, yay, let's all be Christians now, right? Like there were folks that did that and then they like violently conquered the rest of the country. And so navigating that Christianity and that faith tradition for thousands of years, right? There's a different story that we can tell to folks about how to navigate that. And what I also really appreciate about Armenian queerness, it tends to be a little bit more forgiving for folks who aren't ready to come out yet because of the culture, right? And because of the faith tradition. I think that there is in the West and particularly in the States, there's this idea that coming out solves everything. And in a lot of ways it does. And in a lot of ways it is a weight lifted off. But sometimes you can't be 15 and come out. And sometimes you can't be 21 and come out. And sometimes you can't be 35 and come out yet.
Right.
And what I appreciate about Armenian queerness and Armenian perspectives on this is that it's okay. You'll find the time to do it. Don't stress out because you can't come out yet. It's totally valid. You will find it in your own time. And yeah, there may be things that you have to do that you don't really want to do, the way that you're interacting with your family and how you don't want to lose your family and how do you navigate that. But I think that it is giving ourselves grace to not feel like you have to come out right away, that you have to particularly conform to Western ideals, right, of what queerness could be, because it's not the only way to be queer. And a lot of, I know a lot of Armenians who want to come to the States because there's way more freedom here, and I get that, and it came because of our tradition of queerness and our tradition of queer politics. So I don't want to denigrate that in any way. It was necessary, and we need to keep doing that. But I think adding in this other perspectives and wisdoms that we get from diasporas and other cultures, either within the Middle East or Southwest Asia, Africa, Southeast Asia, et cetera, I think is important because it enriches the resistance and the revolution that we need to be creating to create radically inclusive spaces for queer people.
Mm-hmm. And the coming out experience in other countries, such as I can pick out one off the top of my head. I have a friend from Pakistan, and he said being gay there was worse than you were like a murderer. It was just horrible. And he did everything he could to come here, and he finally was able, on a scholarship, to come to school, and he didn't go back. But he ended up marrying someone, and then he was able, through that experience, to stay. But he said it was like torture because it's criminal to be gay in Pakistan, and I'm sure in other countries. So your the Armenian experience and the Pakistani experience, and I guess the Iranian experience and Russian experience. A lot of Russians are not only leaving because they don't want to be sent to war to kill other people, but they're leaving because they don't feel free there either. So it's a journey for a lot of people, and we're lucky to. Although in the United States we have our we have our dark side. I hate to say, we do, and unfortunately it's growing and it's getting. I'm hoping that the people here will realize that once you take the rights from one group away. You follow me? And then you could be next. We need to be in this boat together and sail together.
Well, to your point about Russia particularly, we are a global – to pick up on what you're saying here, we are a global community, and, they did the Don't Say Gay bills first a few years ago,
yeah,
right?
Sure.
And so our fascists in our country, right, the conservatives in our country saw that, and they've now adopted it and kind of made it, tied it to the American homophobia.
Yeah, because Putin is their new Trump.
Yeah.
To them.
Yeah, they love him.
They love him to death. And they saw on TV when they were doing the pride parades in Russia, the cops were beating up the people that were marching in those parades because it's not – you're promoting a what's the word? I don't know what they call it in their.
Yeah, I can't remember it.
It's like indecency. It's an indecency. You're promoting indecency. That's what they call it in Russia, and they want that to be done here in the name of religion, and that's dangerous. So we need to stick together. Everybody, every marginalized person, whether you're black, you're gay, you're queer, you're Asian, you're Native American, whatever you are. Realize that there's somebody else in the same boat, and we need to get in this. We need to join hands and fight against that horror, which is fascism. So I think you were going to say the same thing, right?
Yeah, and I think where I was going with that is that queer folks in those countries could give us a heads up. I think it's really easy to be like, oh, that's happening over there. That's happening in Pakistan. That's happening in Armenia. That's happening in Russia. But they, in Poland, Hungary, wow, just nightmare over there as well. But because of these global conservative and fascist movements, they all are learning from each other, right? And so in queer communities in those areas can give us a heads up, and they can talk about how are you resisting over there so that we can learn about our resistance and how we can break that down, but also send that out, right? So there can be a dialogue between them. And to your point about I'm thinking actually of the Rainbow Coalition of Jesse Jackson, right, in the 80s. But each of our community struggles is unique, and there are different ways and barriers that needs to happen there. And I think that there is something valuable and valid about learning about how that, police brutality shows up very differently, right, for Black, African, and African American people than it does for queer people. We both have histories of police brutality, right? We both, Pride started as a riot against the police, right? So we have these, but it's different. And I think that if we can begin to understand those differences, then each of our community revolutions, each of our advocacy for changing, right, public safety and making it actually about safety, right, it will be enriched by that, by understanding how are our different communities dealing with that, and then how can we overlap and address those different barriers. And in doing so, those barriers come down so that none of us are left behind. That's
a good point. That the word safety. When you said that, a light bulb went up over my head because I'm every time they, meaning the fascist end of the spectrum, demonize one of our groups. Guess what? People start dying. Look what happened with the China virus. Asians were getting killed and beaten up. Because of you-know-who, Voldemort, I call him on my show if you listen, the name that shall not be mentioned. Do you like Harry Potter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little less so because of what J.K. Rowling is doing. And
well, yeah,
but
that's
it's hard to separate the two right now. I guess the more she says stuff, and I'm like, oh, stop it! She kind of ruins the books for me.
Yeah, right. I totally agree. But so Asians were getting attacked. Then now it's about AP African American Studies in Florida, and now the other red states want to do that. Because they're saying that Black lives don't matter. Mm-hmm. Why are you putting that in there for? People aren't. There's no racism. There's no there's no racism running through the veins of the American
Well,
culture.
they got away in Florida. Got away with the "Don't Say Gay" bills and the banning of LGBTQ books, and now they're going after African American.
Well, they're going to go after everyone,
right?
Because they use that as a way to get butts to the polls. Mm-hmm. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but that's what they do. Yeah. I remember when they did this to the gays back in the 80s, and we got to put them in trucks and send them, put them in these camps, and they're going to spread AIDS to all our people, and don't drink in their. They're going to contaminate our water fountains, and because they didn't know at the time how AIDS was spread. And it was so it was demonizing not only the disease but the people that had it, which happened to be gay. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So there's a way to do that, and they are very good at that. Mm-hmm. Now the African American people are getting that treatment. Oh, we can't teach about Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ issues in the Black community as well. So there's a lot of things that they do to try to. And again, I think this is my opinion, to get butts to the polls. Mm-hmm. It motivates people. Those people, we can't let those people take over this country, so let's vote for these people. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we need to get our people galvanized.
Yes.
Not only the gay community, not only the queer community, not only the trans community, not even just the Black community, not even the Asian. Everybody that's marginalized has to get on the bandwagon and vote and get people into office who care about everybody and make this world a better place. I know it sounds like Pollyanna, but we have to do it.
It's the struggle.
It's a struggle?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, now we're going to veer off to another. Don't you love my show?
Yes, it's great.
It's a lot of tributaries. Would you like to talk about This Queer Book Saved My Life, which I love?
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I love it. You have to listen to the Downright Upright show, and you have to listen to This Queer Book Saved My Life. These two shows, because they're great. I do. I like my show. I guess I'm prejudiced.
No, it's great. Yeah,
thank you. And what our listeners could expect to hear being spoken about on that podcast and what they might learn. Mm-hmm. So take it away.
So This Queer Book Saved My Life is having each episode a new queer guest that talks about the book that saved their life. And it's right there in the title, right? But what that means is every guest interprets saved differently. And so for some guests, it's this book gave them the language to name something about their queer existence that they didn't have before, or it helped them process an abusive relationship, or it helped them begin their gender affirmation, or it helped them process homophobia in their family and get the tools they needed to address that and have a more healthy and positive relationship right with their family. Sometimes it was like the books are epiphanies, like, oh, actually, this is who I am as a bisexual person. Like, this is what bisexuality is, and this is, so it's moments of realization. And we are unique in that when we are able to, and we make every effort to do this, is that we also bring the book's author onto the show as well, so that we can have a three-way, if you will, conversation.
Could I come? No, just kidding.
To have all three of us talking about the book, and because it gives the guest insight into what it took to get that book out there, right? And what's interesting to me of bringing the authors in is hearing, well, where did this story come from? Why did they write this story? But also profound in the sense of there's a very real difference between writing their story and taking ownership of it, whether it's in memoir, nonfiction, YA, young adult fiction, and then getting it published. And that's like a nightmare, right? The gatekeepers are all different, and they're all, there's one episode where, There's a author who's like, I wrote the book and it took 10 years before it was actually published. And then it took like another 5 years before it actually found its audience, right? Because the publishers really didn't get behind it in terms of marketing it. So there's this really different experience for folks as they're, and then also for the author, I mean, not the authors, the guests, how they find the book, right? Again, you have to go out into the world and find these books, and sometimes it's a gift. Sometimes they're at a friend's house and they see on the shelf and they're like, oh, what is that? Sometimes they find it in a magazine, a list of books, like, oh, hey, I might go and try to find that one, right? So it's really interesting to me, particularly at this moment, which is a very paradoxical moment, right? We have, weirdly, and I did not have this on my life bingo card of hearing the Pope say that, laws criminalizing queer people are a sin and should be repealed. And I'm like, oh, really? Which the Catholic Church still, major problems. But then we also have armed vigilantes showing up at drag queen story hours outside libraries.
Oh, that's
right?
so scary.
And all the bills banning and don't say gay and all the attacks on criminalizing trans healthcare. So we're in this weird moment of, how do we navigate this? How do we live through this? How do we have life-affirming moments? So to hear, I don't want to hear necessarily, I don't want to create another podcast that's about, this book is so fun to read, right? I want to hear, how did a queer person read a queer book and found a new way of living or loving on this planet, right? And then to hear the author talk about, this is why I wrote this, and this was the struggle in writing it, and this was the joy in writing it, and then this is what it took to get that story out into the world. I think those are important to hear right now.
Yeah. Can you, because the show is so short, an hour, can you tell our listeners one interview, just pull one out, one or two that you can do briefly, that really motivated you and that you felt it. It was so important for it to get out there so we can get the listeners to maybe navigate that one and go onto your website and listen to that particular one. Because they should listen to everyone, obviously, but one that actually that's so memorable to you, I guess.
Well, one that's, top of mind today, because as the day that we're recording this is our season finale, our season 2 finale, and the book we're talking about is Ties That Bind, and it's talking about homophobia in the family. And that really resonated with me because of how homophobia showed up both in my Armenian side of the family and the American side of the family, and how I lived with that and didn't understand it, and how I wished I had had the tools to navigate that, and that's what that book does. And the guest is Kuwaiti American, and so, obviously Armenian and Kuwaiti experiences are very different, but to have somebody who is from that region of the world talking about that and also navigating, American culture, right, as well. That was just really meaningful to me to hear that. Not that the book is amazing and it speaks to everybody, as the author Sarah Schulman says. She's like, familial homophobia is something that we all share in common, right? We can be in an elevator for 2 minutes and we're able to right away explain what's going on. But how do we navigate that? How do we address that? How do we have? And she advocates for third-party intervention, right? About we need somebody from outside the family to be like, hey, this is who this person is in your family, and they are amazing, and they deserve your love, and you need to knock it off, right? And this is how you're going to get over
them, basically.
But also, this is how you stop the homophobia within the family.
Absolutely.
And the petty denigrations or the, emotional violence or the, emotional abuse or physical in some instances.
Oh, yeah, so. Absolutely. And do you ever have podcasters on your show?
Yes. Yes, we have writers, podcasters,
I would love to be
lawyers.
on your show.
Absolutely.
I guess I could tell you my journey because it's very interesting. I've never actually – I haven't – episode 1 of this show, I talk about myself, which I don't like to do. But there's a lot of my coming out story that's very I'd love to share, but I haven't had time to because I have so many guests and I want to share those guests with everybody. And
I know, right?
But it was a very trying time for me. Being a Catholic boy, altar boy, which is on top of that, and hearing the F word. Not the FU word, the FA word, all over the place, and in my own family members speaking it right in front of me, and I know that I belong. That's who I am, and they're talking about me in such a horrible way. It's very demeaning, and it's very your self-esteem just plummets. It becomes you begin to hate yourself. It's just awful. And I think that's what we need. Just what you just finished saying, having people from outside of that little bubble going in. Bursting that bubble and saying that is not the way to treat that person. And thank you. That's a great way to...
Well, that's all Sarah Schulman. So that she talks about in her book.
It's a great way to end this first half of the show, because now...
Yeah.
You know what I'm going to say, right?
Yes.
We have come to the part of the show I like to call the shift. And it's the shift with an F. Because if you don't say the F, we have problems. Where I shift the questioning away from your amazing career and on your opinions of current events. Okay, you ready for this one?
Oh, boy.
This is a roller coaster.
How much time do we have? I've got opinions.
Well, you got a few more minutes. So as of the taping of this show, we found out that Minnesota, yay, we have good news to tell our listeners, is the first state in the union that has codified reproductive rights into our state constitution. Yay, Minnesota. It's funny. I've been cheerleading Minnesota on almost every show because we've been doing a lot of great stuff.
We have.
Think about it. I mean, other states can't even say that. Do you have any thoughts you would like to share about this significant piece of legislation? Just, share on what your feelings are about it. How important it is.
Well, it makes me think, first of all, how lucky we are to be in this state.
Oh, yeah.
If everything's going to come back down to states' rights and there are no more federal rights, right, if they're going to strip that away from the Constitution, then how lucky to be in Minnesota and to have those protections and to have people that are willing to organize and make that happen. I think the bill is so important, not just for cisgender women's health, but also for trans people's health, right, as well. And I think there's reproductive rights are not just about abortion. And so I think it's really important that we make that connection and we see how expansive this actually is to queer health as well, that this bill also advances that. And so I'm really glad to see that we were right away, that we were going after that. And I mean, how lucky as well that we got the legislature blue, as well as the governor's office and all of the state, cabinet offices, right, as well, that we can say what we believe and enact the legislation and make that law and give people those freedoms and those rights. And it's really exciting to see that. Yes,
because in my opinion, reproductive rights are an integral part of health care. It's health care. If a doctor says to a woman or who identifies as a woman and says to her, if you have this baby, even though you're in your 8th month here, there's a possibility you could die because you have this, that, and the other thing. I mean, I'm not a doctor, so obviously I know there's certain breech babies and things like that. There's a chance you could die, and so can the fetus. So this is a healthcare thing. Not every and the thing that makes me angry, here I go on my tangerine again. I always go off on a tangerine because this makes me so angry, when I hear about these things, because they try to say that Democrats want to give women abortions up to the day of birth. Oh, really? How many women I'm going to ask you, JP, how many women do you know or have ever known that had an abortion the day before they were ready to give birth? I mean, come on.
I imagine it's in those instances where, first of all, to answer your question, I don't. As I understand and look at the policy history and the data that goes into that, one of the major reasons why we want to have that, and we shouldn't criminalize doctors. I mean, we shouldn't criminalize it at all, but when the health of the mother.
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say.
Either on the day of or in the weeks leading
Correct.
up to it, where it's very clear that the health of the mother is in risk and we need to do something to protect her,
Correct.
right? Or to protect him, trans men, non-binary folks, they
Absolutely.
also, pregnancy affects them as well.
That's true. You don't have to identify as a woman.
Right.
To get pregnant. And that's another. And then here's my other tangerine. So the Republicans will say, can you give me the definition of a woman? Now, does that irk you? Does it bring your blood pressure way high,
Yes.
or am I the only one?
Yeah. No, it.
You can't even give the definition of a woman, and you want to kill babies till the very last day. I mean, it's just sickening what they're spreading. They're not talking about the health of the mother. They're talking about these little nitpicking issues, and they're trying to get people galvanized again to get butts to the polls. And
well, actually, it can be very quick to describe what gender is. Your gender identity is your internal sense of who you are and the gender that you have, and then you align your presentation and your behaviors to that gender identity, right? And folks who are cis, they begin to do that immediately. Right, and then folks who are trans or non-binary or agender or bigender, they begin to learn that and understand that about themselves. And usually as children, not usually, but then it's like repressed and stigmatized. But it's actually very quick that you can describe gender and then get into all the nuances of it, right? But that gender identity, it is that internal sense of who you are, and that is fixed.
Yeah, and on a lot of my shows, if you listen to them, I use this example all the time. Now, if somebody says, my name is Betty, call me Betty, you're going to say, okay, I'll call you Betty.
Yeah.
Now, why is it a problem all of a sudden when someone claims to be of a certain gender? Please call me this. Please address me as ABC. But this is a problem for some people. It aggravates me like to no end because it's not respectful. Because if you want Betty to be – if you're calling Betty Betty because she wants to be called Betty, what is the difference between that and somebody saying, I would like to be called he, she, whatever pronoun you want to use. I want to be addressed as Mix rather than Mr. or whatever. I'm fine with whatever you want to be called. I have no problem with that. And I don't understand the issue. It shouldn't even be an issue. But again, I digress.
And to correct myself I just said it was fixed, but gender identity can also be fluid, right? And so all the things that we understand about gender are finally us breaking these false notions that were, foisted upon us. And so when people complain like about the LGBTQ, two spirit, and I'm like, yeah, we need that though, because we are deconstructing what sexuality and gender identity is. And it's actually this very rich tapestry. And we need that. And so, when people are like the alphabet people, I'm like, yeah, absolutely, because there are all of these sexual identities. I'm proud to be
part of the alphabet.
Right? Yes, exactly.
I'm the G. That's how I identify you. What letter are you in the alphabet?
Q.
You're the Q. Yeah, I was going to say that. But I just met a girl. We have friends now, really good friends. We met on the street. We just hit it off. She goes, I'm an L and I'm proud of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
She's like, and I thought about that. I said, yeah, be who you are and love yourself. That's the big thing for me. Anyway, we move on to the next question. Let's talk about, and this one we can talk about forever, but we get time's starting to peter out. But let's talk about the beating and death of Tyree Nichols by 5 police officers in Memphis. Do you think better training alone can prevent this from happening again? Or what measures would you suggest to ensure that the brutality doesn't occur again? Also, as an added tidbit here, did you know that 4 of the 5 police officers had policy violations on their records already? So that should have been a flashing red light,
It's not a training issue. I know a lot of Minnesota State. So the college I work for is part of the Minnesota State system, right? And we train 80% of the police officers and public safety officers within the state of Minnesota, and the education is first rate. What we're giving them, there's not a training issue there, right? When they get onto the force, and we've heard this many, 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 many times, when they get onto the force, they're told, forget everything that you just learned. We are going to tell you how this works. And so problem number 1, right? And then I know a lot of folks as well who are doing really amazing work within departments themselves, right? So there's a really great education that you're getting prior to becoming an officer. And then there are folks that are trying to do really good work when they're already officers and with these police departments. It is not a training issue. In my opinion, it is not a training issue. There are structural issues that we need to rethink what public safety means in this country. And I think that unless we're very serious about that, and we need to stop saying training, 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 or bad apples, it's not. We see these patterns. The same thing with Derek Chauvin we're now seeing with these officers, right? History of violations of, policy, disciplinary measures, and then it's just let it go, let it keep going. And so on the one hand, as a former member of a union, I want to be like, I'm pro-union, right? But we can't hide destructive behavior behind a union contract. And there has to be a way that we begin to structurally address this. Police budgets should not be the biggest part of a city's budget. I remember one of my partners was having a reaction. He's diabetic. And when I called 911, they're like, "Do you want an officer?" And I shouted at them because I was like, "This is an emergency and I need somebody right now." And I remember shouting at them, "Why do I need a police officer right now? I need health professionals. Send an ambulance." And they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah." And the ambulance got there and, everything was fine and, we were getting everything stabilized. And then one of the paramedics was like, "Yeah, so I just, I talked to an officer." And I'm like, "Why?" And they're like, "Well, they called us, to see what was going on." And I'm like, "But what did a police officer have to do? Why was it any part of their jurisdiction when it comes to a health emergency?"
I know, right?
So they're involved in things that I don't think they need to be involved with.
Like a traffic stop. For me, for example, people shouldn't be dying from a traffic stop.
No.
If you want to give them a ticket, give them a virtual ticket, maybe, if you don't have to even stop them. Say you're pulling you over because you sped. You'll receive this in the mail. Goodbye, and and that's it. But too many people are dying for very simple things. We don't have social workers on the scene. That could help with mental health issues. We just want the cop there who has no training in that field.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this could be a whole show in itself, but I just wanted to bring that out there that yes, it's not a training issue because it's an issue.
It's placing the responsibility. It's shifting the responsibility, right? So instead of addressing what's happening within a police department, it's saying, "Oh, well, the problem are the educators." The problem is not the educators. The problem is what's happening within the department and what is being addressed and what's not being addressed there. And so, that's where the change needs to come from.
Yes. All right. This question, I've introduced this question now to all my guests as of 2 shows ago, because I want everybody's opinion. I want to see where everybody's going on this issue, because once the true answer happens, you can see whether you got it right or you were very far from getting it right.
Okay.
It's a clairvoyance question. Oh, yes. I have been asking all my guests who they think will be the Republican nominee and who they think will be the Democratic nominee in the 2024 general election next year. I'm going to pick your brain now and find out what you think and why. We've had interesting answers, by the way. I just want you to know. It could be a dark horse. It could be somebody you think it will be.
I think so many of the Republicans are ride or die with Trump. And so I don't – and the more people like Nikki Haley just got into the field, and obviously DeSantis is going to get into the field, and I think a couple of others, I think the Koch brothers, I was reading something yesterday, they're going to, fund with all their money an anti-Trump candidate.
Yes, they're moving away from him.
That was the original problem in 2016 is the field was so large, and he had such a horrifying message that was – it's not about grievance, it's about cruelty, right? Bonding over cruelty. And that's what happened is the field was so split that he was able to move ahead. But now so many people are ride or die with him that I don't –
So you think it's going to be Trump on the Republican side? And on the Democratic side? Do you think Biden will run? And if not, who do you think will – because I keep saying Gavin Newsom. I don't know why, because I think the Democrats finally need a bulldog. We've had all these really nice people – Barack Obama, how sweet he is, and Joe Biden, little old Joe, and Bill Clinton. Everybody's so nice on the Democrats. Maybe it's about time we get a Trump on our side to fight our battles for us. So even though I don't like that kind of politics, I think maybe it'll wake up the silent people that aren't voting and say, yeah, maybe this guy is good. So what do you think of Gavin? And what do you think of other people that may come?
I'm not going to predict. I worry that it's going to be Biden. I hope that it's not Biden. He said he was going to be a one-term.
Yeah. And by the way, I want to stop you. I don't want my guests to think I'm an ageist.
Right.
I'm really not, guys. I'm 63 years old. I am not an ageist. I just think
we don't
80
need senators in their 90s.
Yeah, that's my point.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
at some
that's my
point, I think he was very good at being let's move away from the
Trump,
psychosis that was,
Oh, I said his name.
He who shall not be named. But I agree. I would love to see Gavin get into it. I love someone who would be a bulldog. I think Kamala has not been set up for success, as all VPs are. So I would love to see Kamala be put into a position. And I think that might happen now that she doesn't have to constantly be in the Senate and be the tiebreaker vote. Mm-hmm. I hope that she is able to really dive in because she's a former attorney general. Like, she can take it to people, right, as well. But we haven't been – because I don't think they want her to you don't want the VP to outshine the president, right? But I hope that she is able to get out and be in places where she is like, ooh, hey, there's Kamala. Like, this is why, people were interested in her during the primary. So I don't know who it's going to be. I can tell you I hope it's not Biden. I would love to see someone who is a – fighter who's going to take it to them. And so that's where, if that can be Kamala, if that can be, Gavin or someone else that's coming up that's willing to do that, I think that's what we need right now. I think that we need to rally around this is who we are, this is what we believe in, and I hope I see that model right now in Minnesota, and I see that model happening in Michigan, where they did the same thing. Right, they recaptured the legislature for Democrats the first time. They reelected a Democratic governor.
They put abortion on the ballot, and that brought the bodies out.
Yep.
See what I'm saying? When you have an issue that'll bring the bodies out, they come out and they vote, and that's what unfortunately what the Republicans do. They use these segregating issues. Hate these people, hate those people, and those people, the other people come out and say, yeah, I don't like those people, and they come out. And and I think that's what helped Michigan a lot.
Mm-hmm. It did. It did. I agree 100%. So I hope that people are looking at what's happening in Michigan and in Minnesota and saying, wait, you can rally, you can fight, you can declare boldly who you are and go for that. I worry, though, about the compromises that happen within the conservative side of the Democrats side of things. You know what I mean? Like, I was so frustrated watching Biden's first half of his term where the progressives, right, and the squad and all of them that are supposedly so, irrational and they, everything, purity tests, blah, 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 they were the ones working with Biden. And it was Sinema and Manchin who were like, no, we're going to be irrational. We're going to.
It was the moderates, yeah.
And so these moderates, conservatives, how you want to, however you want to do that. But it's like, wait a minute here. There's something that needs to be addressed there. This idea that the moderates and the conservatives are the more rational side of the party. I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
I don't think that's true. They were the ones that stopped so many big things from happening. And I also people are like, well, it was just Sinema and it was just Manchin. I'm like, no. The things that you read, and certainly like The Guardian or, Political, where people are like, they're so happy that Manchin is doing that because it gives them cover, right? Other senators who would have voted no, but they don't want to, and so it's giving them cover for Manchin to do that. So I hope also that there is this, not reckoning, but this reflection that's happening within the moderate side of things that, you can go bold, you don't have to be scared. Third way, that Clinton did, maybe that's not the answer here, but whatever it is, I hope that it is bold and aggressive. This is who we are. It
helps all people, yes.
And there's joy in that, and we need to go for it because this kind of tepid, technocratic response may be useful, but it's not inspiring. And
Correct.
To your point, we need to inspire people to get to the polls.
And my last point on this question is Gretchen Whitmer. That's another lady. I think she identifies as a lady, a woman. She, I don't know, I'm assuming. She is amazing. I think watch out for her. Mm-hmm. She's somebody that's going to be a mover and a shaker in the near future. Anyway, so before we end the show, I hate to do this. I could go on forever with you. I just love you. Is there any particular political story that I haven't mentioned that you just want to bring up really quickly before we show the credits?
No, I think we'll leave it there.
Okay, that's fine. So we've come to the end of the show, and thank you again for coming and spending. I know you're a very busy guy, and to even spend 1 hour with me you just made my day.
No,
so
I appreciate
thank
it.
you. And
us queer podcasters need to have
stick
each other's
together,
backs.
and I would do yours in a fast minute.
Yeah, let's make that happen.
Yeah, I'd love to. It would be my utter pleasure. I would pay you to go on your show. Anyway, for more information, love him, about JP and his amazing career, you can go to queerarmenianlibrary.com, right? Mm-hmm. And thisqueerbook.com, or you can follow him at J.P. Der Boghossian, right?
Boghossian.
Boghossian. Oh, my goodness. I'm so sorry.
You're good. You're good.
Well, I'll spell it, though. How's that?
Yeah.
At, this is Twitter, JP DERBOGHOSSIAN. And there's going to be a link next to the podcast so they can click right on it and go right there. So thank you again, JP. I loved doing this.
Thank you for having me. This has been a great conversation.
Oh, my God. I love you. And to the listeners, I'd like to thank you for spending time with us today. And please stay tuned for more of the Downright Upright Show in the near future. Thank you again. And this is your host, Philip Anthony, saying goodbye and see you soon.